Welcome back, everyone. As you may know, we have a wonderful series going on here on Look Media, a look at law. We've partnered up with the premier law firm across the state, Bond Schoeneck King. And we've been delving into a lot of areas of law that we know are of concern to you. And lo and behold, just recently, I mean, Lord knows, there's a lot of talk going on about the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court, by the way, just passed a ruling affecting sales tax for companies, internet companies, that do business through the internet across state lines. And joining me today is an expert about this. This is Tom Simcoe, who's a tax attorney with Bond Schoeneck King. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Very nice to have you here. You know, when we spotted this, Tom, it seemed like a real game changer for us in a number of different ways. Let's inform our viewers a bit about the background on this. Why did this issue come up?
Sure. So the existing law established by the Supreme Court about 30 years ago essentially provided that if you had a seller that was not present in a state in any physical way, you didn't have a store there, you didn't have any salespeople there, no warehouse, etc., that a state couldn't require that store or company to collect sales tax on sales. So effectively what that did was it allowed all the online sellers that cropped up over the last 30 years to avoid collecting sales tax in the same way that your local stores down in the corner were required to do.
Well, you know what? Interesting, because think about this, especially anybody old enough. You can go back to the catalog days, right? You could take the Orvis or take the LL Beans
Sears,
of the world. Yep. And so at that time, it certainly made a lot of sense. And now all of a sudden, you've got the internet, and you've got the Wayfarers, and you've got the Amazons. These are big sellers doing a lot of business across state lines. So what happened?
So effectively, you created this very unlevel playing field for folks. So you had the local stores that had the bricks and mortar facilities to maintain that were collecting sales tax. They were charging effectively a price that was higher than the big guys that were sort of hanging out in one state and just using FedEx and shipping everything. So you had this disparity in what people were able to charge. So that created sort of an uneven economic playing field. And you also had local governments that were losing out on revenue from sales that they would have been getting had those guys all been treated in the same way.
Oh, well, you know, of course, that raises a real interesting part of this story, which is, let's say you're a local retailer. You have a brick and mortar here. You're required to collect sales tax. Those items that you're collecting sales tax on may be the same items that you might be able to find on an Amazon.
That's right.
All of a sudden has an 8% profitability margin that local store doesn't have.
That's right. And they're much bigger too, so they're also doing volume sales that the local person is not doing, and they also don't have a local store to maintain, and they're not paying local workers, right? So you have those ancillary effects, and you also have the fact that the local government is not getting the sales tax revenue that it would have gotten from the local seller that go to pay for the roads, the police protection, the stoplights, the local infrastructure.
Well, you know, that's an interesting point, because even if you are an Amazon or whatever, guess how those goods are getting to that consumer? The same infrastructure that anybody else uses who has a warehouse or a physical location in a state, the roads, and I mean, think about where the sales tax would go to maintain those kinds of infrastructures. Hey, was there any state in particular that started this, and what did the Supreme Court do in terms of setting the guidelines?
Well, so as it stood, there was this called physical presence guideline that came out of this case called Quill. It was called the Quill standard. And so the states, as the internet commerce rose, looked for ways to work around it. New York actually was one of the leaders in trying to come up with, the most aggressive way to try to pull some of these guys in. They passed a statute that was actually called the Amazon Nexus statute here in New York that was effective in pulling Amazon in, basically tying them to some local, if you had a local website, like a historic site, and you had a link to Amazon on your website to buy a book about the site, that would create enough of a connection to the state for New York that they could be required to collect a tax. Other states tried to get more aggressive, and South Dakota, who had the law that the Supreme Court looked at in particular, said, let's just throw out the physical presence idea entirely, and we'll just say, if you have a certain amount of revenue, $200,000 worth of sales, or 200 individual sales, we'll just assume that you have enough connection with our state, that you're doing enough business with us, that it's fair to treat you just like anybody who's located here. And so some of the big online retailers, Overstock, Wayfair, they said, you know what, this is against the existing Supreme Court precedent in Quill. We're going to take it up. We'll bring a case. We'll fight it. And around the country, everybody watched and held their breaths and said, what's going to happen here? Is the Supreme Court going to agree that the world has changed enough that the old Quill standard doesn't matter anymore? Or are they going to embrace a new standard that just reflects the way we live and the way we do business now, the way things need to be paid for? And the Supreme Court ruled what I think most people feel is the right way and said, you know what, yeah, this is the way things really work. It's fair to allow states to collect sales tax in this manner now.
I've got it. You know, this seems to be an across-the-board kind of an agreement, right? I don't care if you're conservative or liberal. It seems to be in the interest of the states in terms of collecting sales tax, but also, you know, I can't keep going back to the idea of that level playing field to make it competitive for that local retailer, that mom and pop store, anybody that has a business to be on a competitive playing field with any of the big internet sellers.
That's right, and it's neutral from the government's perspective.
Yeah,
if there's a taxable sale, they get the revenue.
Right.
They're not trying to get more revenue than they would have gotten under the old model. They're not making more things subject to tax than used to be. It's just that they're capturing the revenue now.
Now, the Supreme Court, the ruling was passed. It will take time for the individual states and their legislators to pass the laws on the state level, correct?
That's right. So what we saw is South Dakota was one of the most aggressive states. And what will happen is a lot of other states that have not been as aggressive, I think New York included, will look at that and say, well, we know we can do at least that and get away with it under the new Supreme Court standard. So let's at least do that, because we're going to lose out on revenue if we don't.
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
it will take time for each individual state, right, to go ahead and pass that law and to see that implemented. I think what we'll see is that a lot of companies will get ahead of the curve. They'll just go, you know what? This game has changed. We're not playing it anymore.
That's right.
Let's just get compliant. We don't have to worry about waiting for the legislatures to catch up. It's easy enough for us to comply. So they'll do that. In the past, they spent a lot of energy trying to avoid having physical contacts with states, which was not necessarily a good thing. It was the tax cart driving the horse. People were reacting to tax rather than to what the market wanted. So I think we'll see some positive changes in that light too. People will start putting warehouses in states where they wouldn't have before and things like that.
Oh, got it. Boy, I knew you were going to be good at this, but boy, you really know your stuff, Tom. Well, it's a game changer, this ruling, and I want to thank Tom for coming in.
Thank you.
For just really, really laying it out. That was great, Tom. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
You're welcome. To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.